Well, welcome back. I hope you're well. Uh, Today, I am going to be discussing and trying to bring together a solution for a topic that I have been covering over 3 sessions. Now, I started 3 sessions ago, 3 days ago to be precise, discussing the topic of infidelity, cheating, and more. And over the 3 sessions, I hope I have been able to cover perspectives perhaps that are not necessarily viewed in society as the norm, but perspectives nonetheless that I think and I believe provide solutions and provide a way of thinking that will lead to better outcomes. Now, one of the things I learned many years ago was not to have or to develop or to choose a formula with regards to social issues that works all the time. Do not be too rigid with regards to a formulaic approach to dealing with relational or social issues, but rather to develop a framework of thinking that would work most of the time. Formulas are often chosen as though they work all the time, and that this is the mistake we make relationally. We become too rigid, and we've subscribed to a formula that may have worked in the past under certain circumstances, and we attribute to such formulas almost a guaranteed result. Now, my approach, since I learned this way of thinking, was disavow yourself of rigid solutions that always work. And instead, when you're dealing with an environment that changes, when you're dealing with people whose emotions change, when you're dealing in a landscape where you do not control the other participants, it's better to have a way of thinking which could work most of the time rather than a fixed, rigid formula that you believe will work all the time. In summary, that was what the last 3 sessions attempted to present to you. Now, in today's session, I am going to provide a solution that also will be different. Take this as you will. Let me start by saying, like I mentioned in the first 2 sessions, I am not making a moral position. I am not making a value judgment. I'm trying to deal with issues that plague human beings, especially in the West. Your character determines in many ways whether you have integrity or not. I'm not bothered about that specifically. Morality, in many ways, determines molds and fashions your character. Your character decides, or in many ways, your character reinforces what you believe. So your belief system is a product of your character, which is the product of your moral judgment, if that exists. That belief will create values. It creates a hierarchy of what is important, a value system. Your value system will determine your ethics will determine your actions. And then it goes back in loop. Your actions will determine what you believe to be right or wrong, your moral position, which also influences your character or the lack, back again into your beliefs, back again into your value system, into your ethics, to your actions, and all the way around. In a secular fashion, I'm not dealing with that. I'm dealing with human beings, emotions, logic, lack of logic, irrationality. You see, human beings are more known for our ability to rationalize rather than to reason. In this particular instance, I'm going to be giving you things that should help you reason rather than rationalize. Now, rationalize simply means you're rationing lies, mostly to yourself. I'm going to give you 2 examples to start today's session. And I'm going to show you how the 2 examples perhaps could lead you down two different pathways with regards to dealing with infidelity, cheating, and more. Now let's imagine, and I learned this perhaps again some years ago, many years ago, and if both of us found ourselves on a boat, say in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and for some reason we realize that there is a leak on the boat. Now there are several schools of thought as to what should you do. My great mentor said, Warren Buffett, to be very precise, to give credit where credit is due, says, should you find yourself in a chronically leaking boat, energy devoted to changing vessels will be more productive than energy devoted to patching up the leaks. That is one school of thought. In other words, the Titanic developed a significant leak. You couldn't patch up that leak, but most people may have attempted to defy gravity and logic and reason and rationality, rather than focusing on finding a lifeboat and getting off the sinking boat. That's one school of thought. The second, I might say, analogy I could use is, imagine both of us on a boat, and this boat is not a very huge boat. You have a shotgun and I have one. But in this particular instance, there are two separate boats. You are on your boat or in your boat. I am in my boat. There are just two of us, a small boat. As we travel alongside each other, for some reason I get angry based on a conversation that both of us are having, a quiet scene, again in the same Pacific Ocean. And I shoot a hole on the floor of my boat out of anger, and suddenly water starts to gush through. What would be your reaction? Would you, in attempt to match my behavior, do the same to your boat, or would you just simply say, well, I should know better? Now that is a different school of thought. Now let me bring these two examples into intersectional dynamics and dating. The first is what women generally do. The former has to do with, you find yourself in a chronically leaking boat, change vessels. So when women encounter infidelity or cheating, and even men, the very first reaction is to jump ship, change vessel. But we do so without realizing or without knowing anything about the lifeboat we are attempting to jump into, and whether the lifeboat is in a worse condition than the leaking boat that we find ourselves in. For example, the Titanic took hours before it was finally submerged in water. If a lifeboat has a leak, it could take minutes, 59 minutes, 58 minutes, not hours. So if you stayed on the Titanic, there was a higher probability that, all things remaining equal, if help came within a few hours, you may have been saved. If you jump into another sinking lifeboat and it leaks and it goes down within an hour, then you die before the person who remains in the main boat. Now that's the reaction most women tend to take. You hear of cheating or infidelity, she packs her bags and she leaves. Now I have seen and I have heard of women who have destroyed their entire families as a result of either an accusation or the reality of cheating. Incredibly naive, incredibly stupid. Now, you may not accept my position or my conclusions. I hope to explain in the sessions that follow why I think that is a foolish decision. especially one that is made reactionary rather than from a place of peace and response. The reactionary approach is simply to say, I'm done. And then you jump aboard another boat, only to find that that boat you jumped aboard also has a leak. Now, if you take those two, the latter of the two examples I gave is to say, well, if we are both in two separate boats, if I make a mistake, there's a break of trust. You don't have to stoop to the same level as I am or as I have to match my energy. Two people in a committed relationship, marriage, the man goes out and commits what he considers to be his free will, but which breaches the agreement he had with the partner or his missus or his wife. She has a choice. She can say, well, I guess this is an open relationship. So if you can do so, we're equal, I should be able to do so myself. That is the same as seeing someone shoot a hole in their boat and deciding to do the same in your boat. Both of you end up worse off than you should have. I'm going to address three things in today's session, having given you those two analogies. The first is actually what I call the tolerance required for dealing with issues with to do with infidelity and issues to do with cheating. The second has to do with what I call the attitude you should have in order to ensure long-term success. Yes, there'll be some level of short-term discomfort and some level of short-term irritations and pain, but I'm focused on the long term. That is my goal. My goal is actually your outcome, your output, or your results. I don't care so much for the what I call the birthing pains, the struggle pains. Now, the third thing I want to talk about, which I think is the most important for today's session, is the rules of engagement. The third will be perhaps where I provide the best value to women. On first here, I think you will find it to be unacceptable. My encouragement to you would be, don't dismiss it. Firstly, don't accept what you hear. Don't reject what you hear. And please don't neglect what you hear. Take the information I give you in part 3 and memorize it if you can. Write it down so you can commit it to memory. Write it down. A blunt pencil is better than the sharpest mind. Don't trust your memory. Don't trust your mind. Because a time might come when you need to refer to this particular information. Sometimes the best decisions we make are the decisions we have thought through carefully, and we've been able to identify what I call the net present value, the net benefit, all things remaining equal. It's not the best, it may not be the second best, but it could be the third best. Negotiation and knowing how to get to the best, second best, or the third best is a very, very useful skill to have. Now, let me start with the tolerance. Again, I'm not making a moral case here, so please be careful about what you take from what I say. In the sessions that I discussed, the 2 sessions, I talked about the asymmetry between a man and a woman. Firstly, we are not the same. Secondly, there are double standards that benefit men, but also double standards that benefit women. Thirdly, the value proposition in relation to both sexes are different. What we bring to the table is different to what we want to receive from the opposite sex on said table. So a woman has to understand very carefully what a man wants, and a man has to understand very carefully what a woman wishes to receive. But the key part of what I talked about was the fact that we are both gatekeepers to 2 separate functions, one being resources, men are resource objects, and the second being sexual, women are sex objects, or beauty objects, or visual objects from a man's perspective. In any case, the tolerance that I want to talk about is as follows. In the sessions that I discussed, I talked about the life cycle of a woman and how a woman can understand and maximize her life cycle position to ensure she doesn't self-sabotage. In my experience, and from my lived memory, and from my readings, learnings, teachings, I have found that 9 in 10 women self-sabotage themselves every single time there is an issue of infidelity or cheating from the man that they love. They self-sabotage. His actions notwithstanding, her decisions and actions self-sabotage. But I do not make a case that a woman should tolerate whatever a man throws her way. I do not. But I make a case that there is something called a balance of power when you're dating. The balance of power simply means that one person holds the power position on an intersexual dynamics basis, and over time that balance of power shifts. It gets to a place of equilibrium and then it tilts to the other person. Nature has designed it that way. For example, a woman who is 18 or between 18 and 20 who has beauty, youth, chastity, purity, attractiveness, well raised and well trained. On the dating marketplace, if you place that alongside a man who is 30 and who has £1 million in his bank account, the woman has a higher balance of power than the man himself, because £1 million is not what it used to be previously. It would be no different from saying he's worth a few £100,000. So she has much more. Why? Because she has a purity, perhaps if she's still a virgin, and if she's, say, a 9 or a 10 in beauty. She has more of what men want than what the man has. In order for her to equal in her sex value proposition a man with a resource proposition, the man would have to have a few millions, a multimillionaire. Let's use the example of 10 million. Now you have equals. She has youth, beauty, chastity, purity, and she's a virgin. He, on the other hand, has £10 million in his bank account. And he has a good methodology of increasing his wealth. That's a balance that is equal. This would mean that if a woman is 19 and she's dating a boy who is 20, the balance of power is skewed in her favor. But if the same woman is 10 years older, 29, and the man is 42, her power position is much less than his, because as we get older, we have more of what women want, resources, or whatever derivative of resources we provide. But as women get older, they have less of what men generally want. Sex, beauty, youth, fertility, and all of that, and purity. So the balance of power changes. Therefore, when dealing with cheating, you have to understand very carefully where you are in that cycle. We are born, we go into high growth, we start to level up in our growth, we become mature, we start to get into a stage of what we call even keel, and then we start to die. That is the trajectory or the life cycle of a human being. A woman goes through the same process. A man goes through the same process. Her value is given to her at 18. It is the highest. Assuming she is a virgin, it is the highest. But as she starts to encounter and experiment and date, time does what it always does in all of us. It takes away our beauty, our youth, our purity. So a woman starts to lose her sexual marketplace value and her reproductive fertility value over time, which is what men want. What that simply means is as follows. The younger you are as a woman, and I'm speaking about relationships which are committed relationships, marriages, cohabitation agreements, or for some reason any form of contractual agreement between two parties, whether that be contractual legally or contractual theologically, culturally. The more she's younger, the more power she has in terms of the swing and the balance. Obviously, it all depends on the man on the other side, his age, his resource, or socioeconomic status. In any case, a woman who is 17 is not in the picture. We put her aside. A woman who's 18 and above is an adult. Assuming she is married, she should tolerate infidelity and cheating, especially if she's a virgin, or if she came into the relationship as a virgin. She should tolerate cheating and infidelity the least. So let's assume she's between 18 and 20, and she came into the union as a virgin. There should be no reason why her husband should be committing adultery within the early stages of a relationship. Why? She has beauty, she has youth, she has fertility, she has chastity, she has every single thing men want. And men, generally speaking, do not go gambling when they know what they have. Now, there are exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking, the younger you are, if you're also well behaved, have the right attitude and the right decorum and the right training, the right servant's spirit, the likelihood is very low. You start to see occurrences of infidelity or cheating as the woman starts to age, or as her behavior starts to change, or as she starts to behave in a different manner to what she used to be. You also start to see infidelity when a child comes into the picture. She's had the first kid and the second kid. So from a sexual marketplace perspective, perhaps in this case, let's say she was 5'5", 5'5", and at the time weighed 55 kilograms. Then she has the first child and the second child, and she now weighs 160 kilograms. 4 years later, she's no longer as attractive to her husband as she was, or she's not maintained her frame to the same, not to the same degree pre-birth, but she hasn't maintained, all things remaining equal, what should be a seasonal childbirth adjustment. Now, let me give you numbers, as I have to go fast. 18 to 22 is 5 years. 23 to 27, 5 years. 28 to 32 is 4 years. And then 18 to 22, 5 years, stage 1. 23 to 27, 5 years, stage 2. 27 to 32, 5 years, stage 3. 33 to 35, 5 years, stage 4. 35 to 40, 5 years, stage 5. 40 to 45, in my opinion, 40 and above is another stage. Your behavior in each stage should vary. First stage, your tolerance for infidelity and cheating, if you are married or in a committed relationship, should be very low. Very, very low. He should have no reason, especially if he's younger, because you have the balance of power. Disrespect. Assuming both of you are equals in terms of what he brings resource-wise and what you are sexually, there is an agreement that has to be reached, which is that it's too early for all the silly behaviors. When you go past the first stage, 18 to 22, and you move into the second stage, I award you and I give you the same level of intolerance to cheating and infidelity, 23 to 27. But as you go past 25, you have to start reducing your standards and your expectations of the absence of infidelity. In any case, if I were to throw a number out there, I would say, well, give or take 5%, there's a drop, because your value also drops slightly. Once you go past 25, it's almost a 10 to 15% drop. Now, 28 to 32, there's another drop. You've lost about 20 to 25% of your sexual marketplace value, and even your reproductive fertility value. But 30 is the mark. Once you've crossed 30, the whole idea of you not accepting cheating is a fanciful notion, to be very frank. And the reason is simply because your ability to compete drops drastically. As a matter of fact, once you go past 30, you almost lose about half your sexual marketplace value and your reproductive fertility value. Why? From a reproduction perspective, you have geriatric pregnancy. 5 years away. So you've gone from 18 to 30, which generally beauty lasts about 12 years for women, all things remaining equal. That's the peak of beauty, 12 years. If you've wasted 12 years and you've crossed 30, you cannot demand the same things as you did when you were younger. It's really simple. So there has to be a decorum, a level of very intelligent, smart thinking that you need just to ensure you don't throw the baby away with the bath water. In any case, once you've got to 32 and you move from 33 to 35, that period, 3 years, you've lost probably about 60% of your sexual marketplace value and your reproductive fertility value. Why? You're at the cusp of high-risk pregnancy. So men who, generally speaking, have no incentive other than wanting to have kids for marriage, who choose to marry you, are taking the highest risk. Why? At 35, that is high-risk pregnancy at the end of 35. So if you're between 33 and 35, that 3-year period is a hiatus. It's almost like a gamble. You've reached a place, biologically speaking, where women are encouraged sometimes not to go into pregnancy because it's higher risk for the mother and the child. Now, I say this simply to say that once you get to about 36, on the sexual marketplace perspective and on the reproductive fertility perspective, reproductive wise, you've gone past high risk pregnancy. Now you're talking about 70% loss of your RFV, but also almost 70% of your SMV, your sexual marketplace value. Your tolerance for infidelity has to become a lot more smart, wise, good judgment, rather than reactionary. 40 and above, quite frankly, I hate to say this, and I hate to be the one who says this, 40 and above, women who talk as though they are still 20 are insane. At 40 and above, the quality and caliber of men you can attract and keep drop. Remember, let's assume you've been married for 15 years, from 25 to 40, and then for some reason, he steps out when you turn 40. He met you when you were at the peak of your beauty, but you met him, assuming you were both the same age, when he had nothing, just potential. At 40, he's a lot more desirable to women who are usually half your age than you are to men who are half, you might say, either half your age or 10 to 15 years older than you. So you have more to lose. The idea of you jumping ship and moving out and starting a new life is fanciful. Why? There are fewer men. There are more of him who are desired, and there are less of you who are wanted. So you have to be strategically important, strategically mindful of how you make those important decisions. That is the tolerance that I think you should think about as you go through the experience. Let me move to the second part of today's session, which is the attitude that is needed. Again, this is not a moral conversation. You can take two adages: see no evil, speak no evil, hear no evil. That's one approach. That's one approach you can take, which effectively simply says, men will always be men. Men cannot change their nature, and therefore I chose him as my man. And in many ways, you're simply saying, well, he is really no different from his, you might say, lineage, the other animals. He's a mammal. And therefore, men will always find other women attractive, especially those who are younger than you, sometimes older than you, depending on how old you are. And because they don't do so emotionally, if he's found with his pants down in a private setting, or you hear of his pants being pulled down by himself, you can dismiss it as, well, what is the big deal? It's done. The question is, does he want to stay? Now, I'm going to give you something that I think can serve a lot of women right. Let's say you find yourself in a situation where your husband, your partner, leaves the house and has started to see someone else, but he comes back home. You can take an attitude which says, I'm grateful that you have come back home. The most important question is not, where did you stick your penis, but rather, did he come back home? This is important. Women are not really smart in how they think. You're too emotional. If he returns, then it means he wants to be with you. He doesn't want to be with her. You've won. By the fact that you have all the deeds, by the fact that you have access to his life insurance, by the fact that you have perhaps half his wealth and net worth, by the fact he returns home, it means that he hasn't chosen her over you. You are winning. You don't throw away what you have for a woman on the other side who he doesn't really care about or may not care about and who is losing. The winner doesn't throw away the match, so the loser wins. You walk away and he says, well, I guess I have to choose someone then. I may as well choose her, which is what most men do. Now, let me put that aside. Again, the point I'm making is your attitude matters. So here is perhaps a formula that always works. It's irritating to implement the first time, but it works. Men are very logical. We're very simple, very logical. You notice that he starts to return home late. Normally he would be back from 6 p.m. or 6:30, and then suddenly it's 8 p.m. Sometimes 9 p.m. No problem. You know it's not work. He's not at work. There is someone else. No problem. When he returns back, he often returns and he has already had dinner. You've made food. He's not interested. No problem. When he gets home, all he wants to do is have a shower and go to bed. Again, no problem. Here's my recommendation to you. Counterintuitive, but it works. Before he returns, you cook him his good meal and make a packed lunch for the next day. Put both aside. Have his pajamas ready for him. On the side of the bed, have two. One by the bed, and the second one, preferably, somewhere in the communal hallway, by next to the bathroom, just in case he decides I'm going to sleep on the living room couch. So when he returns, he can wash off his guilt and he can go into his pajamas, which you have prepared for him. When he changes into his PJs, whether he comes in and gets into bed next to you or goes to the living room or the next bedroom, just wait. Don't ask him where he has been. Don't ask him questions. You're not his mother. Don't nag him. Don't irritate him. Remember, his conscience is playing with him. Let his conscience do its work. You can ask if he would like to have dinner. If he says no, it's fine. Just simply say, I've made you a packed lunch for tomorrow. I hope you enjoy it for breakfast or for lunch. And before he goes to bed, now if he comes back later, 10 p.m., 10:30 p.m., or 9 p.m., or 8:30 p.m., once he has had a shower and changed, go next to him and simply say, I'm grateful that you've come back home. Thank you for coming back home. Thank you for coming back home to us, me and the kids. Or thank you for coming back home to me. It means a lot to me to see that you've come back home. And leave it like that. Just do that every single day. I can make you one promise. Assuming he was coming home at 10:30, by the end of the first week, if you just stopped nagging him, made life easy, made the environment serene and peaceful, what you will find is that suddenly it goes from 10 p.m. to 9, to 8:30, to 7, to 6. Women, you have to learn how to use a man's conscience to guide him. You're not our mothers. You're not our peers. You're not our friends. You're not our mates. You don't shout, abuse, raise your voice, because it just means he doubles down on his actions. Now that is the attitude you should have. And let me move very quickly. I don't have time. But let me move very quickly and talk about rules. Many a times I have spoken to some female friends I have, and when I have raised this conversation that I am about to have with you, they have often thought, you've got to be joking. I'm not. The infidelity or the cheating will happen with or without you. Accept it. The most important question is, do you want to control how it takes place, when it takes place, and both the frequency and the duration? Let me say that again. The infidelity or the cheating will happen with or without you. The most important question is, do you want to control when it takes place, how it takes place, and the duration? Part 3, I discuss a few things to keep in mind. Now, when I've spoken with my friends, female friends, I have said, most men are confused. And sometimes our confusion pushes us into the hands of another woman. And most times, your behavior and your mannerism keeps us in the arms of another woman. But we are going to go to another woman. What you want is for us to come back home and to minimize our return to her woman. So you're going to place, I wouldn't use the word restrictions. You're going to give him what he wants by getting into an agreement. Now, I said in the sessions that follow that, generally speaking, if you haven't discussed it, a man is judged first based on his words. Just as in the same way as a king and his words are one. And a king is sovereign until he speaks. But when he speaks, his words limit what he can do or say. If you haven't discussed it, then you can't complain. The vows do not make provision for infidelity as a cause or reason for walking away. It doesn't. So you have to discuss things in advance before they occur and agree on terms. I call these HOTs, the heads of terms, the agreement. Now, number 1, here are the rules. Recognizing that the cheating or the infidelity will happen with or without your permission. You want to be part of the process. As painful as this might feel or sound, there should be rules. I talked about the 4 pillars of a man's responsibility: provision, protection, the priestly duties, and professing his love by his presence. And I also mentioned that it is cheating when he takes any of the 4 and provides it to another woman, especially without your consent. So we'll go through all those 4 areas. Number 1, when it comes to provision, there has to be a cap on how much he spends with all his silly girlfriends, should you choose to call them that. The number is 5% or less of the disposable income left. 95% of the wealth is for you and the family, your offsprings, your children. He can spend up to 5%, but no more. So firstly, you've simply said, your most important resource cannot be distributed to other women. It's purely for the family. I don't mind you spending 5%, take her on a date, buy her a few drinks, but you can't be extravagant. You can't be spending too much on accommodation and flights and all that. No, 5%, that's the cap. I'm going to discuss in the sessions that follow how this works. But let me suffice it to say that what it simply means is when you limit to 5%, then it means the quality of women he can attract reduces. Now, I hope you get this. This is a game of the highest level. If you limit the quality of women he can get, then he automatically should know his worth, and therefore it minimizes the likelihood of cheating. No one wants to cheat with a scruffy woman who lives down the street, and we want the most attractive. If we are going to leave you for another woman for the act of sex, she has to be a hot woman, she has to be attractive, and beauty costs. But if you put a cap on the spending, then it means we can't afford what we really want. But remember, this is an agreement. There has to be a gap on what it spends. Number 2, there can't be any parallel families. There cannot be any dual families created as part of the process. Simply means he can't have any kids from the other woman. Absolutely not acceptable. Now, this also then goes to number 3, which has to do with the defiling of the marriage bed. He has already done so, but I'm going to qualify this and say, you don't know that woman, and very likely she has other sexual partners. It's not your husband you do not trust, although he has broken the trust. It's the other woman. So there should be rules. He can't actually be bringing back venereal diseases or STDs. Therefore, there is a rule. I don't care what you do, you have to wear a condom. That is the rule. You cannot bring back into this bedroom any V diseases or STDs. You just cannot. You can't have kids outside, you cannot start a family, and you cannot bring back diseases. Now, this means that in many ways, although he's gone astray, you're dictating what is acceptable. Now, he might decide to ignore what you say, but at least you're setting down the rules. Number 3, the time spent has to be no more than 5%. Remember, professing his love through his presence. 5% or less. 95% is the family, 5% or less. This means he can't be running around town with his new girlfriend whilst you are at home looking after his kids. Not acceptable. Now, this also brings me to an important part, which is if you limit the time spent to 5%, it means you also limit his presence and his ability to profess his love to her. All you're doing here is just clipping his wings, but saying, yeah, you can fly, but I'll clip your wings, but you can't fly too much. This is important because if you limit the amount of money he spends and you limit the amount of interaction he can have sexually and you limit the amount of time he spends, then it means it no longer becomes fun. Number 4, restrictions on location. Let me say this so you can understand. Let's assume you live in London. She can't be in the same borough. If you live outside of London, she can't be in the same village or town or even city. You can choose how you play this. The last thing you want is a woman who knows where the family house is, knows what you do during your spare time, is jealous of what you have, and therefore decides to bring that disrespect to your space. So there should be restrictions on location. It can't be the same borough, it can't be the same village, it can't be the same town, or can't be the same city. You have a small girlfriend out there, she's in a different city. She's in Manchester, no problem. She can visit to London, but she has to go back to Manchester. This simply means that you maintain your honor as a woman. There isn't bad and wrong rumors going around about you, because women are very territorial. The young girl who is dating your husband or playing with your husband will grow in confidence, and she will bring the fight to you to separate you from your man. You have to get skilled at fighting, but simply be very, very classy and simply say, I don't want to be within proximity. Proximity matters. If he wants to see her, he has to be a woman who does not remain within proximity to you. There is no negotiation on this. I talked about the importance of the priestly duties. A man's purpose, a man's vision, a man's path, a man's strategy. He cannot share this with her. There have to be restrictions on what he shares with her. Why? The more a man shares with a woman, the more she actually starts to pair bond with his dreams. And a woman who bonds with your dreams has bonded with your spirit and will bond with you emotionally and physically. Remember, what we're trying to do is keep his interactions at a physical level. Just like an animal. If it's ejaculation, like urination, just go get a piss. Want to piss? Go piss and come back home. Don't talk to you ride on about your plans and your business ideas and the family. No. The priestly duties should be kept to the family and the family only. Now, what you notice in these 4 things is I've restricted provision, I've restricted protection, by restricting provision, I've restricted the priestly duties and then professing his love. Let me give you one more before I close. He cannot maintain the same woman. This is important. And it's counterintuitive, but it's important. He cannot maintain or have the same woman for more than 6 months. At the end of the 6 months, should he still have that desire, she has to go and he has to find another one. Now, most women will not understand this, but the reason for this is because if women understood how hard it is for a man to actually secure a woman, the time it takes, when you limit, you say, well, it'll take him a month or 2 months to get her finally. So we do something that is ongoing. One night stand to fine, but something that actually continues every week, it might take him a month or two. She may not like him after the first date, second date, or third date, even after intercourse. But should they get going after the third date, and let's say this is month 2, and let's say he's seen her 5% of the time, which is perhaps once a week, for maybe 1 or 2 hours every week. If he continues to see her for more than 6 months, he starts to develop affection and intimacy and feelings. No, this is ejaculation. You have to cap it at ejaculation. It means if you limit it to 6 months, then he has to start all over again. So what you find is he expends all that energy to get her, then he has to leave her. Men start to think, well, what's the point? What's the point? I may as well just not even start anything. You're playing a game that is smart by saying, I don't want you spending time with her. The more time you spend with her, the more you may fall in love with her. The more suddenly what was supposed to be an emotionless activity of ejaculation becomes lovemaking and intimacy. Suddenly you're telling her about your project plans and business and your dreams, and she starts to nest in your vision. So you, the woman, have to be able to go through some of these items that I have discussed and make sure that you do not allow your man to have free reign in his infidelity and cheating. 6 or 7 items I gave you. Think about those. Now, in the sessions to follow, I'm going to go through each of these and expand it slightly so I can explain to you why it is in your best interest to choose each of them. Now, I've given you some clues already, but I will expand on that so that you can understand how you can win, despite the circumstances which perhaps you never wanted and never wished for. But I'll close as follows. A man is only as faithful as the temptations he overcomes. Those temptations will be the temptation for power, for money, and for sex. The more he earns and the older he gets, the more opportunities are thrown his way, because his resource ability and capability and net worth starts to increase. When a man gets to a point where he overcomes his temptations, his character is developed. So his character is only as good as the temptations he has developed or overcome. The younger he is, the fewer the likelihood that he would have gone through those tests. The test for his loins will be what breaks your relationship. Not power, not money, but what is between his legs. Therefore, whilst you might think, I'm with a great man, I always give women a simple example. Yes, your husband currently might be faithful, and I hope it stays that way, but there are no temptations. Temptations come to those who proclaim, let me say this, temptations come to those who proclaim their position and affirm their faith. This simply means the younger he is, he hasn't been tempted. Wait until he gets to 35, when wealth starts to come through, when opportunities start to come through, and when women start to surround him, because you as a woman, you're competing with the women who will be around him. If there are no opportunities, if there are no avenues, or if the value of the opportunities are not really that great, then he hasn't been tempted. On the other hand, let's assume you met him when he was 25 and he made £6 an hour and he's built a successful business. It's worth £60 million. That is when the temptation comes. And the question is, can he overcome all those temptations? When he gets to his Garden of Gethsemane, would he stay faithful? My view to you is prepare for the inevitable. If you prepare, then when it comes, you can just simply say, well, like Peter. Remember the master said to Peter, Peter said to the master, listen, if all the disciples die, and if everyone walks away and betrays you, I, Peter, who has loved you from the day we met, I will be next to you, and I will die with you. And the master said, oh, Peter, you should not have said that. You shouldn't. Because you've professed, you've proclaimed your faith, you've proclaimed your commitment, and now you will be tested. But let me tell you what will happen, Peter, so that it is on record that I told you, but also so you do not feel too bad about yourself. Before the cock crows on this night, you, Peter, my loved disciple, my rock, you will betray me 3 times. And Peter said, impossible. Impossible. Same Peter that pulled his sword and took someone's ears, surely as the Lord lived, the same Peter betrayed his master, just as the master promised. But remember, there is forgiveness afterwards. You have to allow opportunity for forgiveness and for restoration. Now, there are 3 things I've talked about in sessions before: repentance, restitution, restoration. That's not for today's session, but keep in mind, prepare so that when the time comes, you can smile and say, when I told you, Peter, that you would betray me 2 times with someone out there, and lo and behold, you have, but I forgive you. Now, I hope this has been useful.